Okay, welcome everyone. Good afternoon. Good morning to Malik, because Malik here is not in our part of the world, so it's very early morning for him right there, over there where he is. So for the rest of you, I think we are quite close by. So good afternoon. I hope you had a great lunch. Some of you are here from the morning session. So before I invite Malik on, well, we go through an introduction again for those of you who are not here with us in the beginning. Okay, I know a few more of you again registered beforehand. So if you know any of them who have registered along with you, or you registered with your friend, please go ahead and remind them of the session that's going on now. But let's not keep the rest of you waiting, and let's just dive right into it. So again, my name is Yen Ling. I'm from Creators at Work. I have my co-host over here, Raven. She is from Zvook Live, and also the co-organizer of Asia Podcast Festival. And of course, we have our trainer for today, Malik, and he's calling in all the way from Germany today. Okay, so we are very honored to have him. So what's Asia Podcast Festival about? It is a celebration and recognition of podcast excellence in Asia. We wanted to bring the best in industry together and provide a sandbox for emerging talents, and to grow the whole industry over here. So it was co-organized by Creators at Work as well as Zvook Live. And Creators at Work is a media agency who brings together a curated network of media and creative professionals to match them together with brand owners or clients. And we very comfortably cover all the creative aspects, all the way from conceptualization to the delivery. It might be social media, TV, or video. And Zvook Live brings their experience in podcasting, especially being one of the first podcasters here in Singapore, to the clients by helping them avoid the pitfalls that they have already gone through, and to help them stand out from the crowd. So they are a consulting service and also provide podcast assistance, production assistance also. So Asia Podcast Festival is made out of 4 different pillars. One is PodLab, which you're sitting in right now. It is a whole month of training and workshops that bring in trainers and experts from all over Asia as well as around the world. It also involves the awards, which I'll touch on a little bit later, a conference that will last over 2 days on the 2nd and 3rd of December, where we will have more seminars, trainings, and talks, as well as a marketplace to help grow the community and have a sort of sprout the exchange of ideas, and just the expertise to help grow everyone together. So a little bit more about the awards. If you haven't heard, we have created, we are here to recognize the best, and to recognize all the efforts and the great quality of podcasts within Asia. So we also want to empower Asian voices to share stories and the diversity to the rest of the world. So how to, whether you're eligible for the Asia Podcast Awards, first of all, is open to all Asian podcasters. We accept podcasts in all Asian languages, including Mandarin, Bahasa, Tamil. It's like all dialects of the Asian community as well. And you must still be active in 2021. So here's a list of the 6 different categories that we have. 2 of them are general ones for Podcast of the Year as well as Host of the Year. But we also have Best Comedy, Entertainment, Lifestyle, Best Science, Tech and Business Podcast, Best Narrative Storytelling, as well as Best Art, Society and Culture Podcast. You can find out more, of course, at asiapodcastfestival.com, including the rest of the lineup of workshops that we have also. Okay, today is just the 2nd day of our PodLab. We have over 10 more workshops that's going to go. I know some of you have signed up for the All Access Pass. We totally welcome you. You are invited to all 4 pillars of our Asia Podcast Festival. If you have not, then there's a lot more exciting things waiting for you there. Okay, so Thank you so much for hearing my monologue for the past couple of minutes. A little bit of housekeeping before I invite Malik up on stage. We invite you to, turn off your mic when you are not speaking. But if you do have any questions, please feel free to voice them out. Unmute yourself, vocalize it. Especially if you're hearing something that you are quite unfamiliar with and you really don't know where it's going. An alternative is, of course, dropping any questions that you have inside the chat box. And both Raven and I will be moderating it. We will have a Q&A session at the end of the session also. Okay, so without further ado, Malik, I am going to hand it off over to you.
Hello, beautiful people. Thank you for having me. Pleasure and honor to be here speaking at this event. First of all, a big shout out to Yenling and Raven for this amazing work organizing the event and just generally supporting the podcasting industry, which is booming. There's no doubt about that. Definitely was booming for a while now in the United States and things like that. Definitely is kicking in pretty strongly in Singapore and Southeast Asia, generally speaking. In Asia, as far as we know, China has been into podcasting for a while now in a very different way, though. It's like water and oil. These ways of doing podcasting, they're not really mixing all that well. But since you guys are sort of in the middle, you might suck in all of the good stuff from both sides and make it your own. And I would also like to thank all the people who decided to join the session. Hopefully you had a good lunch and you digested it well. I'm not going to be falling asleep listening to me talking about statistics. I'm pretty pumped. It's 7 a.m. Over here in Baden-Baden, Germany. As we speak, I already had my second coffee, listened to I Love Rock and Roll, so I'm pretty pumped, and we can kick this in, shall we? Does everyone see my screen now?
Yep, perfect.
Yeah?
We can see it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so today we're talking about the world of podcast statistics, as mentioned. So let me share a little bit about myself. So I'm Malik. I am currently acting as a CTO and co-founder of this company called Zvook. That's zvook.co. I invite you guys to visit the website, take a look at it. It's a platform that connects podcasters willing to monetize their work with advertisers and companies willing to reach out to pairs of extremely engaged ears, right? And we do it by means of technology. Let me just see why. For some reason, I lost all of your faces here, but okay, anyway, bear with me. So that's what we do. And eventually we could help all the attendees here to start monetizing their podcasts. But there are a couple of things that you will need to, there's some work that will need to be done in order for you to be able to do that. And I'm pretty sure companies like Vox and so on are aware of these little pitfalls you need to take into consideration. Hopefully this session will cast some light on what's necessary for podcasters to start properly monetizing their content. Moving forward, so I have a master's in computer science and engineering. I was involved in IT industry for over 14 years now, both hardware and software. Traveled the world a lot doing these things, building companies. Went to China, Shenzhen, to do some hardware related stuff as well. So yeah, I guess I sucked in quite a bit of engineering hands-on experience, and now I'm doing this thing. I'm doing this thing as a bit of a jack of all trades, and as they say, master of none. So on a daily basis, I transition all the way up and all the way down the technology stack, trying to help podcasters monetize and advertisers find nice, cool niche podcasts. I'm an introvert, but who knows how to hide it? And this is why today I'm publicly speaking, which is a bit of a shocker. But bear with me if I start, staggering. You should know what it's related to. Otherwise, my other points of interest include music, sports, reading, and learning foreign languages. So I can comfortably conduct conversation with you guys if you hit me up on LinkedIn, Twitter, or any other social network on these topics. And of course, feel free to connect with me, just like Jeremy, I guess. I hope I pronounced this name correctly, who's very active right now on LinkedIn, on both LinkedIn and this session, to do the same and connect with me. And I will do everything in my power to answer your questions and help you guys out. Okay. So if you guys have questions in between, you can obviously shut them out. Otherwise, put them in the chat, and beautiful people from Asia Podcast Festival will assist in curating those questions, and we'll be answering them at the end of this session during the Q&A. A little disclaimer is that I personally do not consider myself being a guru of any kind when it comes to podcast statistics, or as a jack of all trades, master of none, any topic for that matter at all. So I might not be able to answer all of these questions, but having spent a considerable amount of time in the podcasting ecosystem, I believe I do have something to share. And I do have answers to most of your questions. But again, if I don't, those questions will be answered post factum, if that's okay with you. All right. If there are no introductory questions for me, then I will probably jump right in. Is that okay?
Sounds good.
Okay. So let me make a quick introduction of this session. And essentially, the bottom line is nothing goes unnoticed in the digital world. And by using technology, we inevitably leave traces that enable marketeers to pull analytics and draw educated conclusions about people, their behaviors, tastes, beliefs, and so much more. It's not a secret for you guys, I'm sure. And needless to say that these data represent a gold mine for anyone willing to improve their products or to turn this to their advantage, so to say. In this particular session, we'll cover statistics-related topics, such as what kind of information marketers can expect to get from you, what for, ways this information can be collected, advantages and downsides of doing it one way or another, and what to potentially expect from this podcasting industry as it matures at such a frenetic pace. Okay, so what podcast statistics exist and which ones matter the most? As they say, you can only improve what you can measure. And this maxim is at the core of any efficient marketing effort, really. Advertisers are on the quest of maximizing the ROI when it comes to spending hard-earned dollars on ads. And this is why it's so critical to be able to properly target the right audience and adequately measure its response to advertising efforts. Traditionally, one would try to identify a cohort of relevant potential or existing customers and put the right information in front of their eyes, or in the case of podcasting, ears, and they would like to do it at the right time. They'll then run an experiment on a slice of this audience, measure the conversion rate, adjust, rinse, and repeat, essentially. This process is going to repeat. Consequently, advertisers need to be able to base their opinion on tangible metadata for picking the right show and measuring the effectiveness of an ad within it. And several ingredients are often being used to do so. These ingredients, I like to split them into two categories, and that's targeting and monitoring. So the session is structured in such a way that we are addressing both of them one after the other. So targeting is all about planning for success. Even though it's difficult, if impossible, to create a perfect target audience cohort from the get-go, there's always some fat, you know for a fact, should be trimmed. And the more you know about your customer persona, the quicker you can frame the right audience. So what you see on the slide right now is basically the selection of these criteria that can be used for filtering and creating your cohorts. First two are probably the most prominent, the most important. And the very first one is widely used used in podcasting and marketing, and that's per episode listenership. Okay, and if there's one thing that you guys need to focus on, especially if you're a young starting podcast, it's grow your audience. If there's one thing you should take out of this session that will propel your monetization efforts into the stratosphere, that's obviously growing your listenership. Now, how you get there, that's a different story. But anyway, per episode listenership, basically how big or small is the show? And I would say, like I just said, size does matter, but it matters less than the ratio of dedicated listeners to all listeners. Basically, niche podcasts that are often referred to as the long tail are a great way to maximize marketeers' ROI. By the way, ROI, I don't know if you guys are familiar with that, but that's return on investment. I'm pretty sure I'm saying obvious things here, but just in case. But the biggest issue with that is scalability. So basically, finding a niche show, getting in touch with its host or manager, setting everything up, keeping tabs on post-release reporting is a full-time job, essentially, especially when the budget should be spent on many such shows by marketeers. So imagine how many times they will need to do, like rinse and repeat the same thing. If they have $1 million to spend on niche podcasts, how many 1,000 listeners per episode it would take them to get there. So it's a problem, right? Especially for the long tail. And that's exactly the problem my company is solving, Zvook. The company I am a CTO of, that's what we do. So as a reminder, if you visit zvook.co to learn more, if you send me an email at Malik at zvook.co, or if you get in touch with me after this session, we can have a friendly chat. I can help you out. Oh, sorry. Then comes monthly listenership. They're both listenerships, but there's a difference. So per episode listenership is advertising. So in advertising only makes sense when the ad is quote unquote baked into an episode. That is, the ad will live in one episode forever. Or maybe actually a set amount of agreed upon time. Monthly listenership is used when a podcast uses the so-called DAI, or dynamic ad insertion, for those of you who never heard this term. And that's across their entire catalog. So this means that ad is inserted into a slot in every episode of the show for a set amount of time. The most listens obviously will come from newly released shows, but the advertiser will also accrue listens from the back catalog as well. So a monthly listenership is more applicable to sort of this advertising use case. It's a complicated matter, and some people, well, actually some podcast networks handle it differently, and it's not as widely used as per episode listenership, but it's growing in size, especially for professional podcast networks, I would say, where there's dynamic ad insertion and this whole ad delivery is set up in a very modern way. Then comes geography. Basically, what countries is a show being most listened in? This often coincides with the language of the show, but not necessarily. This allows advertisers who care about geographical location of their potential clients to target relevant shows. And I'm sorry if my coffee machine making weird noises here. Speaking of coffee, cheers, guys. Then we have language. Language is very important when targeting certain countries, or when the product itself is highly language specific. Age range, right? Pretty obvious. Topics people are interested in vary as they grow older, and their spending habits also tend to change together with the income. So age is a very important factor when crafting this marketing narrative as well. Okay, then we have gender split, obviously male-female. And it might sound like a pretty obvious thing, but targeting by gender might be used actually beyond an obvious. It's not only about male-female, it can also be used for seasonal promotions when basically the opposite sex is looking for appealing gift ideas for their significant other. So it can be used in that respect as well. And then we have devices and apps, basically. And by apps, I mean podcatchers. I don't know if you guys are, if this term is widely used in this part of the world, but a podcatcher essentially is a podcast player. Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, and so on, right? So statistics about devices and apps might be used as is for things like app installs, or actually can be used to target wealthier in case of iOS versus price aware in case of Android audience, or even to differentiate between less and more tech savvy folks with iOS and Android respectively, so to say. And these things might also matter if the product you're selling requires some level of comfort using everyday tools, you know, which unsurprisingly actually isn't always the case, right? Some people are more or less tech savvy. Okay, and that's basically it for for targeting, basically prep work before you hit the publish button on your ad. Once you do, though, the monitoring phase kicks in, and basically it's all about measuring return once the ad is in the wild, right? So as I mentioned previously, you can only measure, only improve actually what you can measure, right? And running experiments blindly might yield results, but you wouldn't be able to attribute this yield to any particular factor. Right, you really need to know what triggered what, and so it's important to keep track of a handful of currently available statistics that are, you know, from the monitoring ilk. One of them is obviously unique listens or downloads, right? So essentially simply how many times an episode was downloaded and presumably listened to, although not necessarily. And this is a whole kind of course on its own. We're not going to take any deep dives into it, but if you want, you can, I can share at some point, maybe in the chat or whatever, a couple of useful links that talk about this relatively technical topic. For those of you who are interested, soundsprofitable.com, for example, comes into mind for these kinds of reads. Then we have unique listeners. So if one user downloaded an episode several times, this will be accounted for only once, essentially. So nothing new here. We have website visits. Website visits can either be tracked by creating a separate redirection URL, which when visited accounts for a conversion event, or we can just bluntly subtract normal, quote unquote, normal traffic from the hopefully huge spike in website visits once the ad went live. And probably then some, there's some trailing listens happening once the ad went live. Then we have promo code claims, and this is one of the strongest conversion indicators, obviously. So basically, a special promo code is being generated for every show, or even every episode, which is then being given out by the host to the listeners, either through the audio ad itself or its show notes. So this properly tracks attribution back to its origin. A slightly more techie approach is IP attribution. Not everybody is doing that right now. It's a little bit more complicated to set up. But a number of companies such as Claritas and Podsites and Chartable solve attribution tracking by pairing the IP address that listens to an episode to when the same IP address visits a site and converts, so to say. This is probably one of the most direct ways of tracking, but it has its shortcomings, as basically all stats in podcasting industry. So for those of you who know how IP addresses are being attributed, and for those of you who are, well, actually almost all of us are using multiple devices from multiple locations and multiple networks, IP addresses tend to shift around way more than they used to 10, 20 years ago, and that muddies the stats quite substantially. But anyway, it's better than nothing, right? Okay, so essentially we took a look at the prep work phase. We took a look at what to measure, kind of gauge the ROI. And now let's maybe switch to the topic of comparison, right? Current limitations compared to other influencer mediums, because this is what, in our experience, podcasts are often being compared to, something that is very much online versus something that is very much offline. But yeah, so in case of podcasting, basically once it's out in the wild, it's very difficult to track. And by their nature, podcasts are mostly consumed, quote unquote, off the grid, which makes it very difficult, as I say, for everybody but the podcatcher itself to track things like plays, pauses, replays, rewinds, and so on. This is not the case for information mediums like social networks, where every scroll, every click is being captured to draw conclusions from the big data. Another reason for this difference is that RSS is an open standard, and therefore its consumption is not fully controlled by any given website or application or social network, for that matter. Data is spread in a way thin across different platforms that don't really interact with each other, right? So that's basically the biggest limitation and the biggest difference between sort of quote unquote classic means of promoting your company and podcasting, like advertising in podcasts. Okay, now we could potentially discuss differences between collecting statistics at the source and at the edge. This is a topic that is very dear to my heart, because it's a little bit more, it dives a little bit deeper into engineering and how effectively a platform like ours could collect statistics, this vital science for podcasts who are trying to connect with advertisers. So when it comes to podcasting, there are two strategic moments when information about content consumption can be collected. So the first one is the moment the content leaves its repository, also known as a hosting platform, and the moment it ends up at its destination, also known as listener's ears, right? There are advantages and downsides to both of these moments, and I suggest we explore both approaches in greater details now, because this is what this session is all about, right? It's about details. Let's talk about collecting statistics at the source first, because this is by far the most common way of doing it nowadays, both because it's quite all-encompassing and it's easy to implement, and it doesn't really require any lobbying among the biggest players of the industry. Let me talk briefly about the concept of collecting statistics at the source. Some of you guys might know that TCP/IP protocol is powering information exchange over the internet. And for those of you who don't really know what it is, in a nutshell, it's a fancy way of kind of splitting letters into small parts and routing them in mail envelopes across the globe, right? The contents of such a letter is a request from someone to send back a podcast episode. A person would thus specify which file they want, and the server will send it back based on a couple of attributes. And these attributes can be saved for statistics purposes. What attributes, here you ask? These are things like originating country, device type, language, operating system, size of your device or your screen, preferred encoding, and some so-called MIME information that can be identified or that can identify the program from which the request was originated. For example, Spotify would have their specific MIME sort of tag baked into each letter that is being sent. Apple Podcasts will have another one, for as long as they obviously play well with MIME and they do it properly and not send out some random MIME, which then will be very difficult to trace back. In your statistics, you will see Apple Podcasts, Spotify, so on, and then you have a huge chunk of other, which is basically all those who didn't bother identifying themselves. So there are two ways of collecting statistics at the source, and that is either your hosting platform already includes this service or offers it for you for additional cost. And collected stats can be very detailed in this case, or rather basic. You will have to check it with your hosting provider to be sure. And the second way of doing this is to use a third-party platform that requires you to route all your traffic through it and thus acts as a proxy. So the first scenario with your hosting company doesn't require any additional work from you, obviously. The second one, however, requires you to prepend a special snippet of text to your original RSS feed. RSS, I believe, stands for really simple syndication, by the way, for those who don't know. URL stands for unique resource locator. Correct me if I'm wrong. So when you've done this, when you prepended this little snippet of text to the URL of your RSS feed, you can then simply communicate that quote unquote augmented URL to platforms that are listening or rather listing your show, such as Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or Himalaya in case of China, and so on. Since every request for your podcast episode will from now on transition through the proxy, whose only goal is to collect aforementioned statistics, you'll now be getting these statistics from this third-party platform. Generally, companies specializing in podcast statistics based on URL prefixes will provide you with more stats, hopefully more accurate ones as well, but that's not a given. They will also allow you to easily extract them for reporting purposes, and maybe even provide you with an API endpoint should you want to let platforms like ours to collect it all for you automatically and then just stitch it all together. Besides the obvious limitations as per what statistics can be collected this way, there's a list of shortcomings to these platforms, which will be discussed a little bit later. But for now, another advantage of using RSS feed URL prefixes is that, in theory, nothing prevents you from chaining actually these prefixes should you want to use more than one. Why would you use more than one? Well, there are a couple of reasons why you would like to do that. Now, reason number one, you're basically a stats nerd, right? And you want to cross-verify everything that's being reported to you by supposedly trustworthy statistics collection companies. And to be honest, you're totally right in doing so, because it's a bit of a mess, let's face it. Reason number two, being listed on a specific platform has a requirement for you to use their own prefix, right? So if you want to monetize through our platform, you need to use that prefix, or if you want to do XYZ, you need to use the prefix. Then obviously you don't have a choice, right? If this is a so-called sine qua non condition, you will obviously have to prepend this thing anyway. Yeah, generally every tool will insist that their own prefix be placed very first in the chain of these prefixes. But whether you want to comply with this requirement or not is entirely up to you and the way you distribute priorities. Normally, for as long as the company plays nicely with others, whatever that means, it shouldn't matter too much. Again, at least in theory, but we will see later in this session why this might not always be the case. And the reason number three, well, just for fun, right? More is better. So you just, you want to have them all. Okay, so that was about the concept of collecting statistics at the source. What are the available solutions? As mentioned previously, there's a handful of most prominent podcast statistics collection platforms you can choose from. There's a couple of things, though, to keep in mind when choosing a podcast statistics supplier, though. I thought it was worth mentioning for those of you who don't use them yet, just to give you a couple of attributes that are important. Attribute number one is IAB version 2 compliance. So essentially, podcasting still resembles the wild, wild west when it comes to pretty much everything, actually. And statistics reporting is no exception. IAB, or Interactive Advertising Bureau, is a non-profit organization that is on a mission of standardizing many things revolving around marketing, including attribution and statistics. So they issue and regularly update these standards, and many platforms are now proudly displaying this round IAB certified badge on their websites, and that allows them to establish trust. If you have this badge, this gives you and whomever will be asking for your statistics later on some level of confidence your figures are trustworthy. Another thing you might want to look at when choosing a solution is the number of attributes. And obviously, the more attributes are being collected and offered to you, the better, right? Attribute number three the platform you're choosing preferably plays nicely with other platforms. So some podcasters make use of several statistics collection products in order to get as close as possible to the truth. Obviously, we've seen this, right? Prepending and chaining multiple prefixes to your RSS URL feed. And this allows podcasters to correlate information and draw conclusions from different sources. However, some of these solutions don't play very nicely with others. Since one proxy will be kind of feeding information into the other, right? It's very important to pick the product that relays all the information completely unaltered. The most transparent thing you can come across. Otherwise, distortions can be introduced down the line, and the margin of error will be amplified all the way through down to the episode repository itself until the TCP IP request hits the hosting platform. So you really want to avoid that. The only thing to do here is to basically Google reviews and opinions and so on to figure out whether this thing is supposedly trustworthy or not. Another aspect to take into consideration, which is optional, doesn't have an API access or API endpoint, right? Again, this one is optional, but it can prove to be a good decision-making point for the future when you'll be looking to switch gears and connect your statistics collection platform with other platforms, such as ours, basically, so that we can automatically feed these stats to it and automatically improve chances of monetizing your content. Obviously, the more stats we have about you, the more accurate they are, the more complete they are, the higher the chance that you will get some money right out of it. And either way, you connect this through the API, and this will allow you to stop worrying about extracting and importing information out of and into different platforms that are basically incapable of speaking to each other. And it will allow you to focus on things that you do best, right? Which is hopefully creating awesome content. And the very last consideration point is obviously the cost. We're all price-aware folks, and this should come as no surprise. Okay, what are the shortcomings of collecting statistics at the source? Well, as mentioned in previous sections, since information is flowing down the stream through different proxies, some platforms can distort this information down the line and introduce errors, which will be difficult, if actually not impossible, to roll back, right? We mentioned that. Another shortcoming is that this information that can effectively be collected at the source is actually very limited. For example, it's impossible to know whether the downloaded file has been played back or rewinded or deleted, skipped, or whatever. Such things can only be theoretically collected at the edge, right? And this is what we're going to talk about now. So we've talked about collecting statistics at the source, and now we're moving closer to the podcatcher itself, and we talk about collecting statistics at the edge, right? So the concept, generally speaking, in technology, the term at the edge often refers to the fact that something resides or happens close to the actual consumption or usage without having to, quote unquote, call home or using some centralized sort of brain, right, quote unquote. For example, in the case of an AI-powered electric vehicle, for instance, this would mean that the car should be able to make a decision whether to turn right or left itself, right, on the spot, without having to ask anything remote for help. This is really crucial in instances where the signal is unavailable or when the speed of driving exceeds the round trip of information between the car and its dispatcher, basically. Well, in the case of podcast statistics, we're referring to the Edge as listeners' podcatcher, the program itself. This is especially important for podcasts since, by its nature, podcast show is an offline medium, as I previously mentioned. You download the file to consume it while you're more or less on the go. Your daily commutes, jogging, house chores are perfect examples of that. Unlike any other quote-unquote traditional media, such as YouTube videos, Facebook posts, or marketing emails, where information on user interaction itself is being collected in real time and instantly. When it comes to a podcast episode, once it's in the wild, it's very difficult to track, right? So unless you're collecting these statistics immediately when the user is operating its podcatcher, it's very difficult to do. But when you do collect them while the user is operating the podcatcher, all of a sudden, the same kind of reporting you would expect from any aforementioned classic medium becomes available. And that's huge, right? Not only can we now look into the way the episode is being consumed, so the playback behavior in a sense, but also generally, podcatcher might be granted access to more information such as GPS position, notifications, gender, age, and so on. I hear you shaking, and granted, privacy is a concern, and we'll talk about it a little bit later in the session. But all in all, if we just abstract ourselves away from privacy concerns, this thing beats statistics collected at the source any day of the week, pretty much, right? Okay. Available solutions right now for collecting statistics at the edge. Many platforms will allow podcasters have access to statistics through their own user interfaces. And I might even show you at the end of the session a couple of examples of that. But it happens in a relatively limited way. Since listeners' privacy is a big concern, you shouldn't be expecting to be given raw tabular data on who and when downloaded and interacted with your content. Instead, you should expect anonymized, sort of conglomerated trends presented in form of charts. Again, I will show you a couple of examples of that after the session, at the end of the session, I'm sorry. But that, however, should cover, at least nowadays, most of your reporting needs, right? So we, as a ad marketplace, we don't expect you to deliver more for as long as these stats are legit. Now, as of today, not many platforms give you access to such stats. For example, Apple Podcast gives you that via your own iCloud account. Spotify also comes to mind, but yeah, I would say that's probably about it, right, when it comes to native platforms. Now, we expect to see more and more of that happening to quote unquote whales that are getting into podcasting. And I'm actually looking at you, Facebook, as I say that. I don't know if you guys know that or not, but this mastodon, which is Facebook, just recently, a couple of days ago, got into podcasting as well, which is great news for the entire industry altogether. But there will be caveats, right? As with everything that happens when Facebook touches it. Anyway, what are the shortcomings of collecting statistics at the edge? Well, statistics collected at the edge are quote unquote trapped in the realm of the owner of the podcatcher, right? They might or they might not want to bother collecting or sharing any of this information. They might also restrict them to their own user interfaces without the possibility to let other benefits from it. This, for example, is the case for Apple Podcasts, which doesn't allow for an easy export of any of provided information and anonymizes most of it. So you only get, like I said, this aggregated data instead of the raw one, primarily in form of charts. Shortcoming number 2 is obviously privacy concerns. Mentioned that already as well. Yeah, today, as never before, users' privacy is really a big concern. I'm sure it is a big concern for you guys as well. Users themselves also gradually become more and more aware of the fact that they're being constantly tracked and become restrictive when it comes to granting additional access to application and basically spreading their behavioral data across internet, right? We no longer press that, okay, agree to share, you know, my camera with the chess game that I just installed. Why would a chess game require camera access, right? So this, obviously, these restrictions, they heavily impact statistics collection, even at the edge. Yeah, by the way, a side note, there are companies that specialize in paid stats collection at the edge, where the user sharing consumption information in real time is actually being paid a certain amount. Generally, these amounts are too insignificant to attract users with more purchasing power, which is the most coveted demographics for marketers anyway. It mostly attracts Android users in less developed countries, but hey, that's already better than nothing, right? So many companies do that, and many analytical and statistics companies, such as Nielsen, for example, tend to buy these companies, or at least consume that output for their own analytics. Another shortcoming is that statistics collected at the edge reflect only a fraction of the entire podcast consumption, right? Therefore, statistics that were collected by podcatcher A will obviously have no idea about what happened through podcatcher B or podcatcher C, and so on. So these are all the pieces of information, and this piece of information should thus be collected separately and quote unquote stitched together post factum in order to get the full picture. So these are the shortcomings that I can think of, the most important ones. And that basically covers the topic of these 2 important events when statistics about podcasts can be collected at the source and at the edge, as a reminder. And that's a current horizon of podcast statistics, but we can go a little bit further, right? Now that we've briefly explored current landscape of podcast statistics, actually nothing prevents us from fantasizing a little, right? And I suggest we do it right now. So I call this section Musings on the Future of Podcast Statistics. And I can think of at least 4 elements that I would like to be addressed as we go, as this industry matures. And I believe all of them actually are quite realistic, and we should expect them in the near future. Should probably re-listen to this session in a couple of years and see how good my predictions were. So anyway, coalition between the whales. Platforms and big players were exchanging information on user behavior for more traditional mediums such as websites and social media for a while now. Up until now, podcasting wasn't as important for even the most prominent players within the industry, such as Apple, right? I remember us having a conversation with the Apple team, and they told us, you know, podcasting, yes, it's great, but at the scale of Apple, as juicy as it might sound to you, for us, it's peanuts, really. And this is really reflected in the size of the team that is working on podcasts on Apple. Now, that was a while ago. Since then, they updated a couple of things, released a bunch of other things, and improved their podcasting platform quite a bit. So I don't know if that tendency changed anyhow, but here's a little insider view for you guys. And actually, now that podcasting is arguably trending higher than anything else out there, things are really starting to heat up. And this is why you guys are attending this session anyway, right? You feel the urge and the FOMO, a fear of missing out on podcasting, because it is, let me tell you, you are at the genesis of something, of discovering the gold mine, which is podcasting. So kudos for that. But even if currently there were no signs of coalitions between the whales, it feels to me like a logical continuum, right? Sometimes it makes sense to unite forces so that everybody wins. And it happened before with other mediums. I don't see why it wouldn't happen with podcasting as well. My 2 cents, right? Another thing that I envision for statistics is we will see aggregators of statistics collected at the source pop up. So currently, if you want to use multiple RSS feed URL prefixes, you should be chaining them together in series so that one is feeding into the other without the risk of losing information in translation. We've seen this before. But one logical modification from the engineering standpoint, a logical modification of this paradigm would be to actually drift away from the linear approach in series to the star-shaped or in parallel approach, where information will be equally distributed across all branches of the star, right? This will shorten the final URL. It will speed up content delivery, since there will be no additional hops, and all third-party statistic collection platforms will get their information at the same time and unaltered, since the whole thing becomes asynchronous, right? I think it's very logical, but the name of the game now is who gets to play the role of the hub, of the central dot in the star, right? And that's a whole different story. Now, just like we will see aggregators of statistics collected at the source, I'm pretty sure we'll see aggregators of statistics collected at the edge pop up as well. And this, for me, is the coolest one, the one I expect the most. So the idea would be to not rely on any podcast statistics behemoths, but rather to allow podcasters themselves to automate the conglomeration of statistics collected for them at the edge. So imagine having a tool that you could use to associate with all endpoints you're normally pulling your statistics from. And you'll grant it limited access to things like Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Blueberry, or any other statistics collection company. And it will aggregate everything for you, giving you the best of both worlds, actually. Statistics spanning across multiple platforms and the kind of stats that otherwise can't be collected at the source, right? Obviously, there might not always be enough overlaps in information, between what every podcatcher allows you to see, but at least the extrapolation of this information would become much, much, much more accurate. And that's a huge step forward. In the paradigm of collecting statistics, and it brings us way closer to, what generally would be expected from getting statistics from a Facebook campaign or something like that. And the last point is probably we can expect more detailed view on what happens before, during, and after the episode has been consumed. So nowadays, like I said, the amount of data collected per square inch of your screen real estate when you're interacting with any kind of content online is absolutely staggering, right? And same might happen to podcast episodes, playback stats. So where, when, and how did you skip a certain portion of the content? At what time of the day and in what time zone? Did you unlock your phone to do so, or did you double tap, your wireless Bluetooth headphones? Did you mark it as favorite? Did you share it? Did you expand the show notes? Did you launch it through your voice assistant? What did you listen before or after that, right? It's quite spooky, but I see it as a logical continuum to what kind of stats will be collected. Okay, folks, we are gradually reaching the end of this session, and I would like to draw some conclusions. And essentially, podcasting is very different from traditional media in so many ways, but there are also lots of similarities, I feel. So despite it being around for a while, it's still in its infancy, although the growth trend is exponential. And many players who were previously ignoring this hard to handle medium, which is podcasting, are now eagerly hopping on the podcasting train, obviously. So do you guys, and kudos for that. Regardless of how things will turn out, one thing's for certain: we will need complete and accurate data to be able to navigate these muddy waters and make educated decisions. When it comes to marketing, there's no way around it, right? And this makes podcast statistics one of the most critical key points for this medium to sort of carve itself a place of honor on the influencer medium Olympia, so to say. Yeah, tools we currently have at our disposal are rather rudimentary, let's face it, but they're evolving very quickly, and protagonists realize the importance of high quality measurements, obviously. As is often the case, the chain is only as strong as its weakest link. So if there's one thing that I would like you guys to take out of this session is don't be that link, right? Keep your RSS feed tidy and maximize your chances of success by properly implementing your statistics reporting. And yeah, see your listenership and thus your revenue grow, right? Okay, I guess this is it. And next thing we can do is ask some questions if you happen to have any.
Yeah, thanks for the sharing. I think maybe before we start the Q&A, I actually have a question to ask you. Okay, you're mentioning about keeping your RSS feed clean, right? Can you explain to us, maybe to some of us who are not so familiar, what do you actually mean by that concept? Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. So the bread and butter of our platform is actually constructing the so-called knowledge graph. Okay, this is an information where we have nodes and they're connected with edges. So you can imagine this spider web sort of information which Google has for their own knowledge graph. So you know that physics, the topic of physics is connected to the topic of Isaac Newton, right? By the mean of something which is connected to whatever. And that's exactly what we do. And the problem is in engineering, there's this maxim that says garbage in, garbage out, right? So if your RSS feed is not tidy, it's very difficult for us to sort of clean it up on your behalf. One of the examples of that is, for example, language. Many podcasters, for some reason, indicate this default language as being English, whereas if we throw this episode at machine learning algorithms that determine the language, it turns out that it's kind of Romanian, right? Why? Why would you do that? And why would you make us spend significant amount of money on determining what language your podcast is in. We will do that if it's extremely necessary, but more often than not, we'll just ignore your episode, right? You'll not show up in our recommendations. We have things like, for example, durations, your episode duration. There's a specific tag for that. RSS feed is essentially an XML file that resides somewhere on a computer, and it has a standardized structure. And part of that structure is actually the list of episodes, and every episode has a tag which is called duration. So this tag duration is supposed to have this ISO standard certified date string, which is formatted in a very specific way. And sometimes it is, but very often you would be surprised how many strange things we can find in these tags. We see things like 5,000, 5, or 5 written in English, or maybe, I don't know, cat, nothing, whatever. How in the world are we supposed to know what duration of this episode is? And it's important for us because the duration of the episode, its frequency of publication on our platform, if you visit it, if you subscribe, every podcast has this widget which represents the publishing frequency, and it displays when episodes are being, graphically displays how active this podcast is and how much content is being produced in sum. And so the color will be brighter if you produce less content, and will be darker and more vivid if you produce more content, right? So the darker you are, the more likely you are to end up actually in our recommendations. If you don't provide the duration, we will have to figure that out, or simply ignore you, and you are kind of lowering your chances of monetizing your content.
Okay, I saw someone raising his hand. Jeremiah, just give me a moment. I just want to ask a quick follow-up question to that, right? Okay, so regarding the RSS feed, right? Because most of us these days, right, we fill in the metadata, right, for the RSS feed in our hosting platforms, right? Because we fill in the episode description, and we fill in the episode title, we fill in the show title. It's all controlled by the hosting platform, right?
Yeah.
So, but traditionally, I know that a lot of us, because I also podcast for quite a few years, so I used to be trained that we are supposed to do it ourselves. Like we add the metadata manually, right? There are a couple of apps that use it. So is it better for us to edit manually the metadata? Using iTunes or some kind of app, or should we just rely on the hosting platforms? Because they should be the one who know how much duration, right? It's very weird that we have duration ourselves. And we fill in the details like category. The hosting platform should approve, right? Because how do we control it? Because we all use hosting platforms as opposed to the past.
Yeah, I hear you well. Well, again, to my previous point, currently it's a wild west, and unfortunately, very often with these platforms, there's only one way of finding out whether they're trustworthy and doing things properly or not. It's just doing it and seeing, controlling your RSS feed and validating it yourself. You always have access to your RSS feed, right? Okay, platforms are doing it for you, but nothing prevents you from really just copy the RSS feed, put it in your text editor, and just, for the sake of your own curiosity, satisfying your own curiosity, figure out whether it's doing a good job or not, and then switch to something else. And it also depends on how tech savvy you are. I would always argue that the more things you have control over, the better. So I personally, if I was doing a podcast, I would probably go the traditional route that you were trained in, your own RSS feed, maybe even manually managed, depending on how pedantic you are about your RSS feed or not. But the problem is also there's more to it than just RSS feed management when it comes to hosting platforms, right? It also, for example, sometimes it provides this service called CDN, right? Or Cloud Distribution Network. And what that does is if you release your episode, your audio file, which could be just a file sitting on anywhere, right? Like your computer, if it's constantly connected to the internet, it's not a problem. But if you are publishing it in Singapore and I'm listening to it in the United States, the round trip is extremely, especially if you use prefixes, the round trip will be very long, and so the user might actually just skip your episode because it takes 5 minutes to load, right? Especially if a podcatcher is not smart enough to load it in chunks gradually and start playback before the entire file was loaded. Then you're almost guaranteed, like with web pages, today's users are very eager to get to the information. If it loads slower than 30 seconds, or 30 seconds being extremely slow, they will just cast away. It's the same thing for podcasting as well. So CDN is, in my opinion, of paramount importance if you want to be a professional podcaster. And many hosting platforms will provide you that, either for free or for additional cost. Or if you do it yourself, you will have to be a little bit more tech savvy to configure this CDN for yourself, which might or might not be problematic. And there are other perks that hosting companies also give you, and I will show you some screenshots if you want.
Yeah, that sounds great. But I think before we move on, maybe let's try to answer some questions as well. I'll definitely will follow you on that. So Jeremiah, thanks for your patience. Do you want to unmute yourself and ask your questions directly?
Yes, thank you so much, Raven. So Malik, thank you so much for sharing your knowledge and insights, right? My question, I would say, is it's not a technical question, okay? So we all know the rise and fall of that app, Clubhouse, right? Where it was basically promoting and perpetuating the idea of podcasts in terms of vocal and audio sessions, right?
Yep.
Now with the decline, with the super sharp decline of Clubhouse, do you think that this will affect, the future of podcasting? I'm just curious. Yeah.
Well, again, I can provide you with my 2 cents, whatever it's worth. I actually think that it will not have any effect on this traditional podcasting thing. At least we don't see it, right? We've probably seen the rise and fall of Clubhouse, but we haven't seen the fall of podcasting. It's quite the opposite, actually. So I don't think it's going to have any kind of significant effect whatsoever, any effect whatsoever, in my opinion. However, if we talk about the Clubhouse itself, in my opinion, these people got enough money to pivot for as long as they want, to fall back to something that will eventually work. To be honest, I actually love Clubhouse, but not for what it is, not for audio sort of chatting. I like it for, I mentioned in the first slide that I'm into foreign languages, right? And conversation groups, Clubhouse, for someone who's commuting all the time, is a perfect product market fit, right? So if they rebrand that or branch off into something that is just language skills training where people are just communicating and they join in whenever they want, whatever they want for free, I think it's perfect. I've seen also groups where audio is of paramount importance. For example, there are groups where single people are trying to connect, and the voice is actually a very important part. It was proven psychologically that for a woman, for example, the voice is a very strong indicator of a match, right? Imagine a very muscular, very attractive man speaking with a squeaky, chipmunk voice. Doesn't work, right? And for a woman,
are you talking about David Beckham?
No. So yeah, I believe that they started with this general purpose audio content kind of thing, but they have enough resources to just detect these trends and branch out into things that will work and will work perfectly.
Thank you. That was insightful. Thanks, man. I appreciate it.
Just my 2 cents,
Yeah, I think we have a couple of questions in the chat. So I think one is from Jace. I think she's probably mentioning your I think she probably making reference to the time where you are showing like, I think the demographics or something. So the question is, will this be applicable for Asian audience as well? Is there any difference between the man and the female? I think she's referring to the demographics, right? You are presenting like the different data that you can extract from the stats, right?
Well, it's country agnostic, obviously. Demographics, yeah, I would say. I'm not sure I really understand the question. What the difference is between Western world and kind of Asian world when it comes to statistics? Could you elaborate a little bit?
Yeah, I think she's probably not convenient to answer now. So if Jace, can you unmute yourself? No. So I think she's probably referring to the slides you present earlier, right? Because I'm trying to recall, but I think you were mentioning that there are different aspects to the type of data you gather, right? And then you were talking about, and I think your perspective you share is from the States. So probably can we draw any parallels between the States and the Asia in that sense? Because I think that one of the challenges we find in Asia, or at least I think is quite a big challenge, is the lack of data. Like, because remember you're talking about data like the source versus the edge, right? But the problem with the data collected by edge is controlled by companies like Apple Podcasts, Spotify. They release their data but very selectively. So it's like for the rest of us, for example, for Singapore, right? I mean, right now it's so hard to get data, like listening data, like how many people like are actually listening to Spotify if they don't release it. So like, in things like that, like this kind of challenge, is there any way we can tackle that? Because that actually lead to the third question I want to ask, right? Because like I know the source of the edge, the data at the edge, like you said, is the better than at the source, but at the same time, it's so hard because it really depends on the platforms, right? Whether they want to release, right? Like for example, Lipsyn will release for the States, but do they care about Asia to release for the rest of Asia? Whether Spotify or Apple Podcasts, whether they want to release for Asia, right? That's up to them. And so we are kind of like dependent on them. So is there any way we can like get around this, like apart from forcing them? And then you say there are also privacy issues, right? And so how do we get around this then for this part of the world? Do you have any like thoughts on this? Yeah.
Well, it's interesting. It's interesting you should mention that, because I really haven't seen any sort of different. In my opinion, these platforms are relatively agnostic when it comes to collecting statistics. Region agnostic. I see two things that might contribute to that, and one is just produce more content and listen to more content. Right, just generally speaking, as it will be picking up in Asia, it just boils down to the United States and Europe are listening to so much content and they produce so much of it that you have enough data, right? It's less the case in Asia. We listen to less, we produce less, but if you change that trend, I think it's gonna just make more sense because more data, and it will be probably make more sense for podcast statistics company to accommodate for those things if they see that the traffic is significant. And another thing is podcatchers, right? If everybody's using Apple Podcasts, then it's not a problem. They're completely agnostic. But if we're using some sort of third-party local less known things that provide less stats, then it's obviously a problem, right? If you're using Himalaya to listen to your podcasts, then yes, it's going to be a problem to get proper stats. But maybe because you're from that region or from a certain ethnicity, Himalaya is your weapon of choice. And if a major part of a country, maybe Mandarin speaking folks prefer that, then yes, there will be some data lost.
So I have a question which I posted in there as well. Excuse my terminology because I'm not super familiar with all of them. But I think on that note, right, you were also mentioning, depending on where or what kind of statistics the different publishers release out to the podcasters as well makes a difference. So in your opinion or from your experience, is that using one host over the other, or using, putting on one platform or the other, is that going to make a difference in the statistics or the amount of statistics that we can take back?
I'm not going to give any names, actually, because there was a slide that was talking about characteristics that you should be looking at when picking your statistics provider platform, but it also applies to hosting providers as well. And very often these are one and the same. I would go with traditional, proven, tried and true kind of platforms, unless price is a concern for you, or maybe other conditions that are in the terms and conditions bother you. Otherwise, would that impact? Well, theoretically, yes, everything might impact your stats. Obviously, hosting is where your files are. Hosting is where your RSS feed is. Hosting is, if managed through some sort of user interface and generated for you, is going to have a tremendous impact on your performance. So really, Russians have this this famous saying, trust, but always verify, right? So you should trust your platform, but as with everything else, if you're an investor, for example, you should do your own due diligence, right? Same goes for podcasting. Okay, generate your RSS feed, but do read it and do compare it, do validate it yourself. Try to, load your podcast from a different podcatcher from your friends. See how fast it loads. See if your show notes are showing up properly. And very often it comes down to either I made a mistake in the way I manage my RSS feed, or the platform made a mistake, in which case you can either be egoistic about that and just switch, no problems, or you can just get in touch with them and raise the issue. And they're all about, well, most of them are all about pleasing their customers. I guess they'll listen in. I know we do.
Hey, so another question I would like to ask, right? So in terms of like data, right? I mean, for the hosting platform, it's pretty easy, right? So they can so once you sign up with them, they get your data. They pretty much, because I would say they own. Sometimes they own. Sometimes, in any case, they get hold of the RSS feed, so they get all the information there, right? Right. And then I guess in a way, if they want to offer like ad monetization, it's probably easier for them to offer, right? So my question is, right, why for you guys, right, who are like a ad monetization network, right? So how do you I guess see yourself like what kind of value proposition you have over these like hosting platforms? Yeah. In terms of ad monetization, yeah.
In terms of monetization, that's actually we're in a very good spot when it comes to monetization, because we're so agnostic. In respect to hosting platforms, in respect to statistics collection companies, and even podcatchers, right? We hear that a lot. We talk with investors and other people, and they all go about Spotify. What do you do about Spotify jumping into monetization of podcasts? And we say nothing. We don't care. Podcast that's the cool thing. And that's the cool difference between advertising on Facebook, where Facebook controls 100% of supply and 100% of demand. All advertisers are on Facebook and nowhere else, and all the content they will be placing their ads in is owned by Facebook and never leaves Facebook, right? In the case of podcasting, that's absolutely not the case. You can be on all podcatchers at once. And yes, you could be a Spotify exclusive show, in which case, all right, we can or cannot provide you with relevant advertisers. But that's fine, because we have 2 million podcasts out there, and there's plenty of ad real estate we can fiddle with. Plus, it's all about really at the edge or at the source. Again, where does the ad buying, where does it happen? Does it happen on the platform which is only responsible for shows it's hosting, in which case, most marketeers probably won't go there because they don't have the entire pool of advertising real estate. With us, they have them all, right? We have all the podcasts. You can pick and choose. Stats are there. Knowledge graph has been built. We can provide the kind of filtering and addressing the long tail that Spotify could never do, that a hosting company that only hosts 1,000, 5,000 shows, they can only do it for these 5,000 shows theoretically. But even if they did that, it also is, this company was in existence for over 2 years now. And let me tell you, it sounds like a simple thing to do, but being able to enable monetization, collect the stats, classify them properly, create this knowledge graph is not a minor undertaking. And we're only scratching the surface of what it takes to really give you the Google-like sort of experience when it comes to finding niche podcasts. I feel like many hosting platforms actually won't even bother getting into that because they know it's beyond their area of expertise. Or they will probably extend it by merger and acquisition by a company that does it and just integrate it. But again, even if they do that, they will be limited by the fact that they can only apply it to the shows they're hosting, which is probably not going to be a go for most marketeers who want to see the full picture, which is us.
Okay.
Does that make sense, or did I?
Yeah, I think that makes
more nebulated.
Yeah, I think I understand a bit better now because, I do encounter podcasters who ask me the same question, right? Like, why do I need to sign up for pod monetization networks when potentially the hosting platforms can, offer monetization, right? But I think, but I guess one of the answers, apart from your answer, is like, all these monetization is not offered for Asia. That's pretty much, I think, the challenge. So that's and that brings us to another question. Unless somebody else has another question, if not, then I'll just keep asking. So should we even bother, like, for us, right, for creators from Asia, should we even bother to tackle the bigger US monetization market, or should we just focus on, like, creating our own content and building our own ecosystems? Yeah.
I guess it depends. But frankly, if I were you, and this was really, my body of work that I put my, do wholeheartedly, I wouldn't try to construct my content or do anything at all around monetization. If you're trying to earn money from the get-go with your podcast, it's probably not going. You're probably not going to last. You're probably not going to stick around for a long enough time, because frankly, you need to acquire a certain critical mass, and that is at least 1,000 listeners per episode consistently, right? Before you can aspire to earn anything significant. And that is not a minor undertaking. You will have to go through a lot of, you really need to love what you're doing and grind through this, and maybe, I don't know, you'll get to your 100th episode, and then where you will get to your 1,000 listeners across the entire catalog. So if you do it, you kind of tailor your content towards being able to monetize the US content, you're probably on the wrong track. Especially don't do it for the US, because the content market is so saturated. Like, believe me, the lion's share of content, high quality content, is in the United States. So if I were you, I would rather focus, unless your content is about US and US market and something that is relevant to US and European listeners, by all means do that. But more often than not, if I were you, I would actually do quite the opposite, because it's very easy for US marketeers to target US customers listening to US shows. It's very difficult for them to find relevant podcasts in Asia for that same product, right? And part of what we're doing right now is actually, this knowledge graph is going to be connecting shows to topics. And so if you are trying to advertise your, I don't know, recycled ocean plastic made sneakers, and you don't know how to do that in Spanish, well, we can help, right? Because semantically, we know that this show is talking about responsible fashion, and we can do it for Spanish, we can do it for Mandarin, right? We can do it for Korean and so on. So language is not an issue. And if you have your content in English, and English, if you maintain your RSS feed properly and you don't say English US, but you say English SG, then the likelihood of you popping up in this highly exotic request on our platform is greater. So I would do that, actually. Focus on whatever you do best, highest quality content for the thing you're expert in. Don't think about the money, at least for the first, I don't know, X episodes, until you reach the critical mass, then only. So our default setting, for example, in the recommendations is 1,000, right? But we can lower that. So if someone is looking for extremely long tail content, they have the ability to lower that threshold and let some of these niche podcasts in. But generally speaking, it's also not a great ROI, right? And 1,000 listens is kind of your own personal milestone that proves that you became an expert. You acquired critical mass of highly engaged listeners. You've made your proofs. Now the fun can begin.
Okay.
So like what you mentioned, it's about, sometimes it's not so much the size of the audience, but it's really the ratio of the active listeners and audience that you have inside inside that whole pool instead. Okay. So there's a lot of I think from the conceptualization of understanding statistics and how it can help us to monetize. I understand that so Zvook allows us to do that as well, right? To understand our statistics, podcast statistics. Why can't I say that properly? Podcast statistics properly. As well as maybe put ads on it. Are you, is there a step-by-step that one can refer to as to how to go about doing that?
I'm not sure I understood what the step-by-step exactly
so
about.
So say if I right
statistics?
now, yeah, that's right. If I have a podcast and I want to start monetizing, or I already have this critical mass that you talked about, then how can I go about monetizing my podcast?
Monetizing. Okay, well, monetization, broad topic, but essentially what you need is, again, high quality content. You have engaged audience. If you're a niche, if this ratio is great, you have really engaged listeners. There are podcasts about mechanical keyboards, right? And they talk about plastic. What plastic are these keys made of? I can tell you the listenership is not that massive, but all these geeks are highly engaged. They're ready to, wait 3 months and pay $50, $150 to get a very specific, type of keys that is matching their keyboard that they're building themselves, right? Now, that for a manufacturer of these keys is a gold mine, right? And okay, they can have 300 listeners, which they probably do, but the ratio is 300 rather than having 3,000 and only 30 of them are really going to convert into paying customers. This ratio is extremely important. It's applicable to certain industries more than other industries. But again, my advice remains the same. Just like if you had a blog, make sure you position yourself as an industry leader, preferably in a very niche topic. You can be broad, but you're kind of spreading yourself thin, and you're minimizing your chances of monetizing because you're competing with so many people. Like the more a long tail you are, the better. And it also, frames your focus, and you're not all over the place. This podcast is only about, mechanical keyboards and so on. So you do that. That's your bread and butter. That's the blood of the entire thing. The second, obviously, due diligence when it comes to structuring your RSS feed. Have the CDN set up. Make sure it validates. Make sure it's you're reachable. Your contact information is in there. Duration is compliant with the ISO standards and so on. To do that, if you need help, hit me up. I'll help you out. Then obviously subscribe to our platform and claim your podcast. Right? What it does is it basically guides you through the verification process where you find your podcast, and based on the contact information from your RSS feed, you need to prove that you have access to this contact information, which is the email address, basically, verification. And now, all of a sudden, when this is done, what we have is your ad real estate manager, which is as if you had your carousel account or your eBay account, where you can just create products you're selling. Right now, we have things like pre-rolls, mid-rolls, post-rolls, social mentions, video mentions, social add-ons, blog posts, and other. You then determine what CPM or cost per mile, per mil, actually, your ad slot goes for, or maybe a fixed price. And you provide us with some basic statistics. So right now you can't really connect any API to it, but you can fill it out with a form. This is my audience. This is the gender split. This is the age range. This is the geographical distribution. So when we have all this information, it's properly encoded into the knowledge graph. That's it. You are set for the monetization track. Now, yeah.
So we have a few minutes before we close the Q&A. So I was just wondering, right, are you able to show us the Zvook platform? Because some of us may not be very familiar.
Sure.
Yeah, you can share screen and then you show us like how it works. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Let me just maybe.
Okay. So the rest of people in this Zoom. So if you have any questions, please type it in the chat or ask them now. If not, yeah. We'll be closing the Q&A in about a few minutes. Yeah.
Right. So if I share my screen, it's loaded, right? So this is the platform, basically, essentially. We're not logged in, so let me just quickly log in. And yeah, that's essentially where you end up at. Right, we have these podcasts, and this is the recommendation engine, right? To say you're now looking at it as if you were an advertiser, okay? And you're trying to look for something like, I don't know, moms, right? And my budget is of $20,000. I can select some categories, but I might not want to listenership. At least 1,000, but I might let in some of the niche podcasts in. Maybe I want to specify the age range. Maybe I don't. Maybe I want to specify the gender split. Maybe I don't. And I'm just look at it, right? And recommendation would be generated for me. I will see some stats, right? You can either purchase the entire bundle. So that's the recommendation. If you're a marketeer and you don't really know what to do, you don't really want to rinse and repeat that process of finding niche podcasts over and over again until you've reached the budget of 20,000, then you come here, and you as podcasters, your goal is to kind of, as on any platform, to make sure your profile is very appealing, okay, very appealing to those who will be purchasing, because chances are they might stumble upon your podcasts by hand, manually, but more often than not, it's actually going to be through these kind of things. Okay, that's our recommendation. But we also have other relevant podcasts. I'm sorry, my network is a little bit slow.
So how do I make it more appealing? Because you were just mentioning, right, to make your what characteristics are appealing podcast for
absolutely.
advertiser? Yeah, apart from numbers.
Well, numbers are important, and as you can see, you need to at least provide them. They might or might not be attractive, but you need to at least provide them. Ratings actually can matter. They matter a little bit less, but the more sort of external feedback you get from your listeners and the more stars you earn, the better. Your keywords should be every episode. Preferably, you should be providing keywords. Preferably, you should be providing even a transcription of your episode if you have to have one, and description, and actually, surprisingly, an attractive thumbnail. We just figured this is something that's probably the only thing people who are not familiar with your content will be seeing. That's the marketeer. He doesn't really care about your podcast. He cares about people listening to your content, right? But the more professional your thumbnail is, the more likely we found out they are to actually include you in their marketing campaign. You need to have your ad real estate also set up. So, for example, I don't know if there are any shows that have more than one ad slot, but you could definitely add one.
So when you talk about ad slots, right? Actually, that was the question that I had for you. If I go into Zvook and I claim my podcasts on Zvook, like can I put in the ad slots within Zvook, or must I have prepared for this?
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. So what you do is you click on this button, the podcasters, which is called Claim Podcast, and you're looking for your show. So say test. We'll see if we have something for you. And well, apparently there's a test called test podcast. Hey, if you're a listener of this podcast, what you need to do is you need to verify that this is you, and then just claim your ownership. Okay. What's going to happen? Well, you're going to be sent an email to some address, right? And you'll be able to, if you have access to this email address, essentially that represents a proof that you have, that you're the owner of the show. Once you do that, let me demonstrate, for example, the way it's done here. We go to the profile of this. So at some point, instead of claim ownership, you'll actually see revoke ownership, right? So that proves that you effectively claimed the podcast on our platform. And then what you do is, first of all, you provide us with some statistics, okay? That could be geography. Remember I talked about publishing frequency and how often or not often you're publishing. There's some geography information. If you happen to have some listenership, gender split, age range, you can update these statistics on a regular basis, right? Submit them, and you'll be set. And then what you do is you actually go to your ad slots, and as you can see, welcome to your store. Here, brands can book your available ad slots and other collaboration opportunities with a click of a button. You can start monetizing instantly with the opportunities below and add more options later. So here, this particular podcast went ahead and used our so-called ad designer, okay, which then will be picked up by our algorithms and will be suggested to people who might eventually buy it, right? So say you would like to sell a mid-roll. Mid-roll, for those who don't know, this is an ad that begins being mentioned, near the middle of the podcast, okay? Generally between 15 and 60 seconds. You can give it a name. What is this? Some mid-roll, some description, right? And then you can decide for yourself whether you want to go with CPM, which is cost per mil, or the fixed price, right? CPM is basically if in your statistics you specify that this episode, that this show has 5,000 listeners on average per episode, then if you say, $10, which is not the industry standard, by the way, industry standard would be like 20 to 35, say 25, right? Then, as you can see, we multiply it by 5. And we top it up with 20% commission for the platform. And the currency is for now only USD, but it might change in the future. And just like that, you have a preview of what people will see and will be able to click on in order to find it in their shopping carts, right? And basically, oh yeah, as you can see, this one has available ad slots like post-roll, mid-rolls, pre-rolls, so we can add some, right? As a marketeer, I love this show. I've listened to it. We have a podcatcher available, and I update my cart, right? And I'm purchasing. Obviously, you can listen to anything you want on the platform if you want to dig a little bit deeper. And frankly, some of our clients do go into this section and do listen to your episodes, or at least a fraction of them, to get the gist of whether the tone of voice, the so-called tone of voice, is in sync with their brand, or so-called on brand. The tone of voice of this podcast is on brand. So don't try to be on brand with everybody. Try to be yourself, and your tone of voice will be in sync with someone out there. I don't know if that explains more or less how you could go about monetizing.
Okay, thanks for sharing. I think that is really, really useful. I think it's good to see from the advertiser point of view as well, like what they are looking for. Like, because a lot of times I think in terms of content creators, we're trying to guess, right? And then it's a lot of guesswork, right? Like what they want, what they look for us, and then sometimes it's like, we are churning up this content, but why can't we attract advertisers? Or so I guess it's good to see from the perspective, and also how we can use this, right? So what they are looking for. So one of the I guess one of the interesting takeaway that you have shared was the attractive artwork. I didn't realize that it was. I mean, I know that artwork is very important, but I didn't realize that it's so crucial to have a very good graphic, like as opposed to like the title of the show or something, but it's actually the artwork that kind of attracts people. And and I guess for them there's not so much about what the show is about, but it's more, well, not, they're probably not that interested in knowing in detail what your show about, but they are more like looking for, I guess in terms of like demographics, they just want information that they can work with. So I think that's a very interesting perspective, because I think that sometimes as content creators we get a bit caught out with ourselves in our show, so in terms of content and stuff. But and also I think it's also very important, like you said, like some of the I guess what you call housekeeping when you have a podcast. Like I think Yanni has shared it in the chat, right? Clean out your RSS feed, make sure it's working. If it's not, run it through a check, and if a checker, and then you see which hosting platforms, because I think most of us are using hosting platforms, so pick the right hosting platform. If not, unless you are going to DIY, and then you have more control, right? And also like when you sign up for ad monetization platforms, be it Zvook or other platforms, you need to know, you need to define your audience, key in the right data and stuff, because sometimes you sign up and then you kind of drop off halfway, but you actually have to do it properly, input the data, and I guess in a sense. So I think maybe we have I just want to ask one last question. Okay, Jeremiah is raised hand, right?
Yeah,
okay, do you want to unmute yourself?
Yes. Hi, Malik. Thank you so much for the sharing so far. My quick question, right, is basically about the Joe Rogan show. Now, he doesn't really have a focus or a niche, right? Do you have any insights on how Joe Rogan became like the #1 podcast in the world? Yeah, I know, from his commentator days in WWF and now WWE, right? I don't know if that translated to his popularity, doing all that kind of commentating, to hosting his own show and bringing in like millions every month. And the fact that he turned down a 10 million, I believe it was a $10 million buyout from Spotify. I just want to get your perspective. What made him popular? Because he has no focus. Yeah, just curious.
Yeah, well, first of all, I don't think he turned that down. He actually went with becoming Spotify exclusive, and actually now he sees the drop in revenue, and so he's considering actually rolling that back. or maybe even abandon them completely, the whole thing. Now, what makes something popular and something not popular? If I knew the recipe, then I think I wouldn't be talking to you guys. I would be making millions running a successful podcast. But I guess, as always, it's a combination, sort of a hub of many things, being at the right spot at the right time, doing the right thing for the right audience. Joe Rogan started really early, right? And he was sticking to it. Like, now we're talking about Joe Rogan's, but look at his backlog. How much work did he inject into it purely because it was his thing? Content creation. There are some people who have this in their blood, like content creation. They are creators. It's a creator economy. They live and breathe and swear by sharing high quality content, and they don't expect to monetize it immediately. And these are generally the people who end up being so popular. But obviously, he had a pedigree. That's very cool. He had a pedigree in the United States, like WWF in Singapore. Would he make it in Asia? I'm not that certain. Also, the pedigree also gave him access to guests an average Joe Schmo would probably not get access to, right? So it's again, many successful companies, they build their success based on either their previous pedigree, or their connections, or something like solid foundations that just propel them into the stratosphere. If Paris Hilton makes a podcast, she can expect to get to that 1,000 threshold pretty darn quickly, right? So I would say for us, average Joe Schmoes, we need to make a grind through the hard part ourselves. It's the case for us as well. We're a startup, and it's difficult. It's very tough to get this company up and running. We're price aware. It's complicated. We're building a business just like you guys are building a business as well. So just stick to it. I would say success is the product of is actually the consequence of effort multiplied by time. If you make significant effort for long enough, you're almost guaranteed to find a way to monetize. So don't be too greedy too fast.
Thank you.
Sorry, just a very quick question as well. Hi, by the way, thank you for the very insightful sharings and questions from everyone too. My very simple question is just like, for example, if I want to put my podcast on Spotify, but there are also other platforms like Apple Podcasts and whatnot, right? So if I diversify my platforms so much, wouldn't the traffic be very spread it out, if that kind of makes sense? Because if you're redirecting people to so many different channels, so my question to summarize is it better to just only host on Spotify, for instance, rather than putting it on so many different channels? Yeah, that's the question.
Yeah, well, no, you should definitely maximize your success by being on as many platforms as possible in the most properly formatted way possible. Again, we're falling back to properly formatted RSS. And no, absolutely, by all means, be on all platforms out there. That maximizes your success. You have, it's actually a good thing. If you want to monetize your Facebook page, you're at the mercy of Facebook. And actually, if you do that, you might have noticed that they, at some point, at a strategic moment where in the beginning you publish your page, you start publishing a couple of posts, they're getting quite a lot of traction. Your initial posts are getting a lot of traction, but then you see a major dip in that, because first of all, Facebook is testing your content, and second, it's in their DNA to make you promote your posts by paying Facebook, right? It's in their DNA. You don't have that limitation in podcasting. In podcasting, RSS was always a free format, and it still remains a free format, even though the big, players are trying to take over and own internet and own RSS, like Spotify and now Facebook as well. But you still have that one foot forward by not being tied to any particular platform. In fact, I suggest you be on as many platforms as possible, because when you need to be where your listeners are, and many people are now on Spotify. Many people historically are on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts. Okay, they share that, so that's the lion's share, and then the fraction is being shared by anyone else. So I would say Apple and podcast 100%. Now Amazon, Audible, and Google, and now Facebook. That's a small fraction. If you bother, do it. I would suggest you do it. If you're lazy, don't. And then just all of these things will be essentially calling home, right? And you will be collecting your stats at the source. You will be getting this data, and the moment my predictions materialize and we can collect stats at the edge, finally, you will just connect them. But by then, these platforms will be mature enough to be playing nicely with stats collection at the edge, and you will be golden, definitely golden.
Thank you. And I have one last question. So I know you guys are talking about like monetizing the podcasts and whatnot, but before you monetize, you have to reach a certain level of popularity or notoriety, right? So do you guys have any tips? I mean, of course, other than like consistency and doing the right kind of like branding, like art, etc. Do you guys have any tips?
Yeah, well, obviously, first thing first, and I don't think it's going to come as a surprise to you, marketing. Obviously, you have to market your content as if you're marketing any kind of product or any blog post or any whatever publication you might have. Hard work, but I'm kind of saying the obvious here. If you want some immediately actionable tips, I would say make sure the quality. So the quality of the content. This is something you have immediately control over. Quality of your content, quality of the guests you're interviewing, quality of your interviewing, for example, skills, audio quality. And I believe Raven gave you some perspective on that. Make sure you understand how to properly edit your stuff. Make sure you know how to use a compressor. Make sure you know how to use a limiter or noise suppressor or whatever, de-esser, de-peer. Make sure you maybe pay some designers to actually create you a very appealing thumbnail. It's important. You know, we're very visual creatures, and this is why
I can't just give them exposure. I have to pay them. Sorry, I'm joking. Sorry.
Yeah, well, I was going to actually answer it in the same way, but no, really something that resonates with you. Do these things, and I guess do it multiplied by time, and also maybe, you know what, run experiments on listens. For example, we were just rumbling for over 2 hours now, and for some podcasts, this is a perfect format, right? 2 hours of steam, full steam, dedicated content, and dedicated people will listen in. But some people actually keep it down to 3 minutes, right? And that's their perfect duration. You need to somehow find that perfect duration that works with your audience. So are they on the go? Who are they? Are they like very impatient business people, or are they very dedicated artists capable of listening the entire day to you rumbling? You need to be looking at your stats to figure that out. And once you figure that out, just, if it's not broken, don't fix it, right? Keep doing that thing.
So there is no like ideal length for a podcast. Like it really just depends on the relationship that you have with your audience. Is that what you're saying? Like, because for example, YouTube videos, the optimal kind of length is below 10 minutes, right? Depending on the type of contents that you have as well.
Depending on the type of content, yeah.
So if, for instance, if I'm just starting out, like, should I just go straight into a hardcore 2-hour podcast? I don't think so, right? Like, is there an optimal kind of length, or you just go ahead and then you figure it out along the way?
Good question. Again, if I knew the recipe, but one thing that works in so many domains is actually to start to go top bottom, right? Don't start with something very specific. I would try 30 minutes, and then I would try 45 minutes, and then I would try whatever. You just maybe make a wide range of things. Mm-hmm. And see which one converted best, and maybe get rid of the ones that were clearly, you could clearly trim some fat, and then rinse and repeat it again. That's what marketers are going to do, right? They're going to create this cohort, like I said in the beginning of the session. They run the experiment, doesn't work. Or they actually run multiple experiments, right? When you do it on Facebook, you make, say, 10 versions of the image, and in 10 variations, carousel, static image, maybe, GIF or animated video, whichever converts better, and you trim the fat, and you continue like that. I don't see why podcasting would be different in that respect. So go large, and then just reduce the scope until you iteratively converge to something that works for you.
So I will fail forward. Thank you. Right? I mean, like,
that's the key, right?
I mean, at the end of the day, we have to do it to find out too, right? Like,
nothing beats the actual experience and the actual doing of it.
100%, yeah. But thank you.
And thank you, Kayen, as well as Jeremiah, for your questions, and thank you the rest of you for tuning in. Thank you, Malik, of course, so much for sharing with us your insights. I think I personally learned a lot in terms of what statistics actually are, and like you said, it's just sort of a wild west right now, right, for podcasting, and there's so many variations and so many things that you can actually do with podcasts and podcasting. But I think that's what's exciting about this whole industry, as hectic as it is and difficult to understand, at least for me. So thank you so much. With that, we've come to the end of the session. Thank you so much for staying with us through the past couple of hours. Let me just give a very quick roundup to the whole session. Can you guys see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, great. So if you have any more, interested in the rest of the programs for Asia Podcast Festival, please go on to our website, check it out. We have more PodLab sessions coming up. Also check out the awards, the conference that we're still planning for it. The lineup is going to be released soon or so, but it's really going to be very exciting. Then, of course, there's the marketplace where there's a one-on-one matching that's going to happen also. Yes. So for this weekend, we have had all four of our speakers, Calvin, Nathaniel, Raven, and of course Malik, sharing with us. Next week, coming up, we're going more into the actual setup of your podcast, from the very indie, out of your bedroom kind of setup that you can start with, to a little bit more advanced, intermediate recording setup. You're going to spend a little bit of moolah in your equipment, maybe. That's where you can discover a little bit more. We're getting Audio Technica as well as City Music to come in and talk about the different variations that you can work with. Danny from MediaCorp is also going to be coming in and talking to us with intermediate audio editing and mixing, a level up from what Raven shared this morning. Also, most of you might already be inside there. Malik has also joined us right before his session inside the Telegram group. So if you have not, can scan the QR code, join us in Telegram, join the discussion. Any more questions, please feel free to go there. It's sort of like as we mentioned, as part of Asia Podcast Festival, we really want to start growing the community and the interaction, and just help each other, blossom in our little niches of podcasting. So I feel this free exchange of ideas and advice will really help a lot. So join us there. I'll also be dropping an email with this link to you guys very soon. So if you miss it, don't worry. You will receive it from us. But overall, thank you so much for joining us today. I hope you got out as much of it as I did. And thank you, Malik, so much for joining us.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me. Beautiful people.
Yes, you can continue to connect with Malik after this. So he's in the Telegram group as what Yanning has said. So if you have any other burning questions, you can continue to message the group to find out more. And thanks to the Malik, we'll be making this recording available on the later date. So you can watch it again. Or for those of you who missed the session, you can also remind your friends to catch up on this later. We will post more details, which are the sessions that will be made available again. So you can watch it in your own time and learn from it. Thank you very much, everyone. So I think the last but not least, we would like your help to fill in some evaluation forms for us. I think some of you are very familiar with this procedure by now.
Because we end every session off with this. So yes, if you have the evaluation form, please go ahead and do it. I think for some of you, I know you have the all access pass, which means you go for every, all the sessions are available for you. Unfortunately, for every session, you do have to fill out the form, because this E2I actually reimburses you for the number of hours that you attend for the whole workshop or the whole PodLab, I would say. So please go ahead and do that. For if you're non-Singaporean, E2I doesn't apply to you. Helping us with the evaluation form would really, really help us improve our programs a little bit better to make this, to make the festival not only this year, but in coming years, much more exciting also.
Okay. So with that, we wish you a very good rest of the weekend, and we'll see you soon next week. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you, Malik. Yeah, hope you get to enjoy the rest of your weekend and catch up on sleep. Thank you for waking up early for us.
Oh, well. Pleasure.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.
Cheerio.